Imagine a place in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from any continent, where volcanoes rise from the sea, waves crash against black lava cliffs, and ancient chants still echo beneath modern city lights. This is Hawaii, but not the postcard version. Behind the beaches and palm trees lies a story filled with powerful chiefs, royal kingdoms, dramatic overthrow, world war, cultural loss, and an extraordinary revival that stunned the world. How did a chain of islands discovered by Polynesian navigators become the 50th state of the United States? What really happened to the Hawaiian monarchy? And how did a nearly lost language return from the edge of extinction? In this series, we're diving deep into the entire history of Hawaii, from the first star-guided voyagers to the challenges shaping its future today. Trust me, this story is far more intense, emotional, and inspiring than you expect. So stay with me till the end, and if you love discovering hidden history like this, make sure to subscribe and join the journey. Number 1. Ancient Hawaii. Take a slow breath in and gently let it go. Tonight, we travel far into the Pacific Ocean, to a chain of islands rising quietly from deep blue water. This is Hawaii, long before maps were drawn, long before ships from distant continents crossed these waters. The Hawaiian Islands stood alone in the vast Pacific. Volcanoes shaped them, lava cooled into black rock, rain fell softly over green valleys, trade winds moved steadily across the sea. The islands were born from fire. Deep beneath the ocean floor, molten earth rose slowly upward, forming mountains that eventually broke through the surface of the water. Over thousands of years, these volcanic peaks became islands: Hawaii, Maui Oahu, Kauai, Molokai, and others, each surrounded by coral reefs and endless horizon. For a long time, no human footsteps touched these shores. Only seabirds nested along the cliffs, waves rolled against fresh lava rock, rainforest grew thick and quiet. Then, around 1,500 years ago, something remarkable happened. Across thousands of miles of open ocean, Polynesian voyagers began arriving. They did not drift by accident. They traveled with skill and intention. Using the stars, ocean currents, wind patterns, and the flight paths of birds, they navigated vast distances in double-hulled canoes. Imagine the courage required. Weeks at sea, no land in sight, only the sky above and water below. And then, green mountains rising on the horizon. The first Polynesians stepped onto Hawaiian shores carrying plants, animals, language, and tradition. They brought taro, sweet potatoes, coconuts, pigs, chickens, and dogs. They brought chants and stories passed down through generations. They began building a new society. Villages formed along fertile valleys and coastal plains. Families constructed hail, homes made of wood and thatch. Fishing became central to survival. The ocean was not feared, it was understood and respected. Hawaiian culture grew deeply connected to the land and sea. The concept of aina, the land, was sacred. It was not something to own, but something to care for. Mountains, forests, rivers, and reefs were treated with reverence. A system known as ahupua developed. Land was divided into sections that stretched from the mountains to the sea. Each community had access to forests for wood, valleys for farming, and ocean for fishing. This balanced system allowed resources to be shared carefully and sustainably. Life followed natural rhythms. Taro patches thrived in irrigated terraces. Fishermen paddled out in canoes at dawn. Children learned chants that preserved history and genealogy. Elders passed down knowledge through storytelling rather than written text. Spiritual beliefs shaped daily life. The Hawaiians worshipped many akua, gods connected to nature. Pele, goddess of volcanoes, was believed to live within fiery craters. Kanaloa ruled the ocean. Keu represented strength and war. Lono brought fertility and peace. Temples called heiau were built from stone. Ceremonies were performed with care and respect. Society developed structure over time. Chiefs, known as alii, governed regions. Skilled navigators, farmers, and craftsmen held respected roles. A system of kapu, sacred laws, guided behavior, maintaining order and balance. For centuries, Hawaii thrived in relative isolation. The islands were connected internally through travel by canoe, but separated from the rest of the world by thousands of miles of ocean. Forests remained dense. Coral reefs remained vibrant. The night sky, free from artificial light, shimmered brilliantly above the islands. Then, in 1778, sails appeared on the horizon. British explorer Captain James Cook arrived, becoming the first recorded European to reach Hawaii. At first, encounters were cautious but peaceful. Hawaiians observed the large ships with curiosity. Europeans observed Hawaiian society with fascination. But contact brought change. New goods arrived: metal tools, firearms, cloth. Yet alongside them came diseases unfamiliar to the island population. Illness spread quietly and tragically, reducing the native Hawaiian population over the coming decades. The isolation that once protected the islands was broken. Around this time, a powerful leader began rising. His name was Kamehameha. Through skill, strategy, and the use of new weapons acquired through trade, Kamehameha gradually unified the islands under one rule by 1810. For the first time, Hawaii became a single kingdom. Under Kamehameha I, the Hawaiian Kingdom was established. He maintained traditional culture while carefully engaging in trade with foreign powers. Hawaii became a stopping point for ships crossing the Pacific. Sandalwood and later agricultural goods were exported. Yet even as trade increased, Hawaiian identity remained strong. Language, hula, chant, and oral history continued shaping community life. Villages remained tied to land and sea. Missionaries arrived in the 1820s, bringing Christianity and a written version of the Hawaiian language. Schools were established. Literacy grew quickly among native Hawaiians. But cultural shifts followed. Certain traditional practices were discouraged. Western clothing replaced some native attire. Political and economic influence from foreign nations increased steadily. Through the 1800s, Hawaii stood as an independent kingdom, recognized internationally. Honolulu grew into a small but busy port city. The harbor welcomed whaling ships and merchant vessels. Sugar plantations began expanding, changing land use and labor systems. Immigrants from China, Japan, Portugal, and the Philippines arrived to work on plantations. Hawaii became increasingly multicultural, blending languages and traditions from across the Pacific and beyond. Yet political pressure from the United States grew. In 1893, Queen Liliʻuokalani, the last reigning monarch, was overthrown by a group of American and European businessmen with support from US forces. The Hawaiian Kingdom came to an end. In 1898, Hawaii was annexed by the United States. It became a US territory. The islands, once ruled by alii and guided by kapu traditions, were now governed from across the ocean, but culture did not disappear. Hawaiian language, music, hula, and spiritual connection to land endured quietly, passed down through families even when discouraged publicly. The islands continued evolving. Sugar and pineapple plantations shaped the economy. Pearl Harbor became a strategic naval base. And in 1941, Hawaii entered global history once more when Pearl Harbor was attacked during World War II. The event changed the course of the war and deepened Hawaii's role within the United States. Finally, in 1959, Hawaii became the 50th U.S. state. Tourism began expanding rapidly. Waikiki filled with hotels. Air travel made the islands accessible to millions. Yet beyond the resorts, deeper traditions remained. Surfing, once practiced by Hawaiian royalty, became a global sport. Hula experienced a cultural revival. The Hawaiian language, once nearly lost, began reappearing in schools and universities. Today, Hawaii stands as a place of layered identity, volcanic fire beneath the earth, ancient Polynesian navigation, a unified kingdom, annexation and statehood, cultural resilience and revival. The islands remain surrounded by endless ocean. Trade winds still move through palm trees. Waves still roll against black lava rock. Rain falls softly over green valleys. History here is not only written in books, it lives in chants, in dance, in the rhythm of the ocean. As night settles over Hawaii, the Pacific grows dark and calm. The stars above are the same stars once used by ancient navigators to cross vast distances. The volcanoes rest quietly beneath the surface. The islands breathe slowly. And you can rest here too, on distant shores shaped by fire and ocean, as the long story of Hawaii continues gently into the night. 2. Kingdom to Territory. Part 1. Take a slow breath in and let it drift out like a wave returning to the sea. After the unification of the islands under King Kamehameha I, Hawaii entered a new era, one of careful balance between tradition and foreign influence. The Hawaiian Kingdom stood independent in the vast Pacific. Honolulu Harbor grew busier each year. Whaling ships arrived seeking fresh water and supplies. Merchants traded sandalwood, sugar, and other goods. The islands, once isolated, were now connected to global trade routes. Yet within this change, Hawaiian leadership worked to protect sovereignty. Successors of Kamehameha established a constitutional monarchy. Laws were written. Diplomatic relationships were formed with powerful nations including the United States, Britain, and France. Hawaii was formally recognized as an independent kingdom in the 1840s. It was a remarkable achievement for island rulers in a world dominated by empires. But economic shifts were quietly reshaping the land. Sugar plantations expanded rapidly. Large areas of fertile land were converted into fields of sugarcane. Irrigation systems carried water from mountain streams down into plantation valleys. The sweet scent of crushed cane drifted through processing mills. Plantation labor demands increased. Workers arrived from China, Japan, Portugal, Korea, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. They brought languages, foods, music, and customs. Camps formed near plantations, creating multicultural communities unlike anywhere else in the Pacific. Hawaii was becoming diverse in a new way. At the same time, foreign businessmen, many American and European, gained increasing economic power. Sugar exports to the United States became central to the kingdom's economy. Trade agreements tied Hawaii more closely to American markets. Political tensions slowly grew. In 1887, under pressure from armed militia linked to business interests, King Kalakaua was forced to sign a new constitution. It became known as the Bayonet Constitution because it was signed under threat. This constitution reduced the monarch's authority and increased power for foreign landowners. Native Hawaiians, once central to governance, found their influence shrinking. When Queen Liliʻuokalani ascended the throne in 1891, she sought to restore greater authority to the monarchy and return power to native Hawaiian citizens. But powerful businessmen opposed her efforts. In 1893, a small group of American and European residents supported by US Marines overthrew the Queen. The monarchy was dissolved. Queen Liliʻuokalani yielded power to avoid bloodshed, trusting that justice might later be restored. It was a quiet but profound turning point. The Hawaiian Kingdom, which had stood recognized among nations, was replaced by a provisional government led largely by foreign interests. In 1898, during the Spanish-American War, the United States formally annexed Hawaii. Its strategic location in the Pacific made it valuable for military and naval operations. The islands were no longer an independent kingdom. They became a U.S. territory in 1900. Territorial status brought new systems of governance modeled after American law. English became dominant in official spaces. Plantation agriculture continued expanding, especially sugar and pineapple production. Honolulu grew steadily into a modern city. Streetcars moved along its roads. Businesses lined the waterfront. Schools followed American curricula. Pearl Harbor expanded as a major naval base. Yet beneath these political and economic changes, Hawaiian culture endured. Hula, once discouraged by missionaries, continued in homes and private gatherings. The Hawaiian language survived through families who quietly passed it down. Songs and chants preserved memory of chiefs, battles, and sacred places. life across the islands followed both modern and traditional rhythms. Plantation workers labored long days in cane fields under warm sun. Fishermen still cast nets into coastal waters at dawn. Farmers tended taro patches in valleys much as their ancestors had. Then, on December 7, 1941, the quiet morning air over Pearl Harbor was shattered. Japanese planes attacked the U.S. naval base, drawing the United States into World War II. The event transformed Hawaii overnight. Martial law was declared. Military presence increased dramatically. The islands became central to Pacific operations throughout the war. After years of global conflict, peace returned. But Hawaii had changed. Military installations remained significant. Tourism began slowly expanding. Air travel made the islands more accessible to visitors from the mainland United States. By the 1950s, conversations about statehood grew stronger. Residents of Hawaii, diverse in ancestry and background, debated their future. After decades as a territory, the question was clear. Should Hawaii become a full U.S. state? In 1959, a statewide vote showed overwhelming support for statehood. On August 21, 1959, Hawaii officially became the 50th state of the United States. Church bells rang, flags were raised, celebrations were held across the island. Yet even in that moment, history felt layered. The journey from Polynesian settlement to unified kingdom to overthrow to territory to statehood had unfolded over centuries, and still the ocean remained steady. Waves continued their endless rhythm against the shore. Trade winds moved through palm leaves. Volcanoes stood quietly against the horizon. Hawaii had changed politically many times, but the land and the spirit of its people endured. As evening settles gently over the islands once more, city lights glow in Honolulu while distant rural valleys grow dark and quiet. The Pacific stretches endlessly beyond sight, and the story continues softly beneath the sound of rolling waves. Part 2, take a slow breath in and let it go like a tide easing back into the Pacific. After statehood in 1959, Hawaii entered a new chapter, one shaped by rapid growth, global attention, and a renewed awareness of identity. Air travel transformed the islands. Jet airplanes made it possible to cross the Pacific in hours rather than days. Visitors arrived in growing numbers, drawn by warm beaches, volcanic landscapes, and the promise of paradise. Waikiki filled with hotels rising gently along the shoreline. Surfboards lined sandy beaches. The sound of ukulele music drifted through open-air lobbies. Tourism became central to the economy. Resorts expanded, restaurants flourished, small businesses offered tours to waterfalls, craters, and coral reefs. The islands welcomed the world. Yet alongside this growth came reflection. Many native Hawaiians began calling for cultural preservation and recognition. Traditions that had once been discouraged slowly returned to public life. Hula experienced a renaissance, not as entertainment alone, but as sacred storytelling. Hawaiian language immersion schools opened, teaching children in the language of their ancestors. The Hawaiian Renaissance of the 1970s brought renewed pride. Canoe voyaging returned in a powerful way. The double-hulled canoe Hokulea sailed using only traditional navigation techniques, guided by stars, wind, and ocean swells, proving that ancient Polynesian wayfinding knowledge was real and extraordinary. It was more than a voyage. It was cultural reaffirmation. Meanwhile, Hawaii's population continued to diversify. Communities of Japanese, Filipino, Chinese, Korean, Portuguese, and Pacific Islander descent shaped everyday life. Food reflected this blending. Plate lunches, poke bowls, malasadas, spam musubi, all part of local identity. Life on the islands followed a gentle but busy rhythm. Morning traffic moved through Honolulu. Farmers tended crops in central Oahu and on Maui. Coffee grew on the slopes of Kona. Pineapple and sugar plantations, once dominant, gradually declined, making way for new industries and residential development. Military presence remained significant. Pearl Harbor continued operating as a major U.S. naval base. Service members and their families became part of local communities. At the same time, environmental awareness deepened. The island's ecosystems, coral reefs, rainforests, volcanic landscapes, are delicate. Conservation efforts grew stronger. National parks protected areas like Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and Haleakala. Marine reserves sought to preserve ocean life for future generations. Volcanoes continued shaping the land. On the Big Island, lava flowed slowly at times, reminding residents that the islands are alive beneath their feet. Pele's presence, honored in ancient belief, still feels close when red glow lights the night sky. In modern Hawaii, tradition and progress exist side by side. Skyscrapers rise in Honolulu, yet ancient fish ponds are restored along quiet coastlines. University research centers study astronomy atop Mauna Kea, while cultural practitioners chant at sunrise in reverence. There are ongoing conversations about land, sovereignty, and justice. Some native Hawaiians continue advocating for greater autonomy or federal recognition. Discussions unfold peacefully, rooted in history and identity. The past has not been forgotten. It is acknowledged, studied, and honored. Education remains central. The University of Hawaii system expands research in marine biology, astronomy, climate science, and Pacific studies. Students from across the globe arrive, just as ancient voyagers once did, though now by airplane rather than canoe. Through everything, the ocean remains constant. Surfers rise before dawn to catch early waves. Fishermen cast lines from rocky shores. Families gather at beaches for weekend picnics under ironwood trees. Even in a modern state shaped by tourism and global connection, daily life often feels unhurried. Sunsets over the Pacific remain breathtaking. The sky turns gold, then pink, then deep violet. Palm trees sway gently in trade winds. Night falls softly. The journey of Hawaii from volcanic birth to Polynesian settlement to kingdom to overthrow to statehood and intercultural renewal has been long and layered, but the spirit of the islands endures in the rhythm of hula, in the sound of Theolelo Hawaii language spoken by children, in the steady navigation of canoes across open water. As darkness settles over the Pacific, city lights shimmer along Honolulu's coast. In rural valleys, frogs and insects hum softly. Waves roll in and out with patient rhythm. Hawaii rests tonight as both ancient and modern, a place shaped by fire, guided by stars, surrounded by endless ocean. And as the trade winds move gently across the islands, you can let your thoughts drift too, carried softly across calm water, into the quiet continuation of Hawaii's story. Take a slow breath in, and let it flow out slowly, like a gentle wave dissolving into the shore. As Hawaii continues into the 21st century, it stands at a quiet crossroads between preservation and progress. The islands are no longer isolated in the vast Pacific. They are deeply connected to the world through technology, travel, science, and culture. Yet even in this global age, Hawaii moves at its own rhythm. Morning begins early. The sun rises over Diamond Head, casting soft gold light across Honolulu. Canoe paddlers move in steady formation across calm water. In small towns on Kauai or the Big Island, roosters crow before dawn. Mist rests along mountain slopes. Daily life unfolds simply. Children head to school carrying backpacks beneath palm trees. Farmers tend taro patches and tropical fruit orchards. Fishermen return with fresh catch for local markets. Office workers commute through city streets where modern glass buildings reflect blue sky. But beneath routine, deeper conversations continue. Climate change is a growing reality for island communities. Rising sea levels, coral bleaching, and shifting weather patterns bring new challenges. Scientists study reefs carefully. Conservationists restore native forests. Lawmakers discuss sustainable development. Hawaii understands its vulnerability. Surrounded entirely by ocean, the islands depend on balance between tourism and preservation, between growth and protection of sacred land. Renewable energy projects expand across the state. Solar panels stretch across rooftops. Wind turbines turn slowly against open skies. The goal is independence, less reliance on imported fuel, more harmony with natural resources. Meanwhile, cultural revival continues steadily. More children are learning Galelo Hawaii in immersion schools. Traditional navigation thrives. Voyaging canoes once again cross the Pacific, guided by stars just as they were centuries ago. Ancient chants are performed at important ceremonies. Hula is taught not only as dance, but as history and prayer. The past is not distant here. It lives in place names, in mountains considered sacred, in stories tied to specific valleys and waves. Mauna Kea rises high above the clouds, holding both advanced telescopes and spiritual significance. Discussions about science and tradition meet respectfully on its slopes, reflecting the delicate balance Hawaii constantly maintains. Tourism remains strong, but travelers are encouraged to engage more thoughtfully. Visitors are asked to respect local culture, protect reefs, and understand the history beneath the beauty. The phrase malamaina, care for the land, becomes more widely embraced. Across the islands, food reflects shared heritage. Local plate lunches mix Japanese, Filipino, Portuguese, and Hawaiian influences. Fresh poke is prepared with care. Coffee from Kona is sipped slowly at sunrise. The blending of cultures is seamless now. Asian, Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian, and mainland influences have formed something uniquely local, often simply called island style. Life moves with a certain softness. There is urgency in global headlines, but on the islands, the ocean still sets the tempo. Waves rise and fall, trade winds cool warm afternoons, rain nourishes green valleys, even volcanic activity continues quietly beneath the surface. On the Big Island, Kilauea sometimes glows red against the night sky, reminding everyone that creation is ongoing. Hawaii is still being formed even now. The story is not finished, it is still unfolding. Young leaders advocate for environmental justice and indigenous rights. Artists create music blending ancient chants with modern sound. Researchers study marine life in some of the most remote waters on Earth. Hawaii looks forward while remembering. From the first Polynesian navigators, to the unification under Kamehameha, to the overthrow of a kingdom, to statehood, to cultural renewal, each chapter has left its mark. And now, in the present, Hawaii stands as both sanctuary and teacher, a place that reminds the world of interconnectedness, of land and sea, of people and history, of tradition and change. As night falls once more across the Pacific, Waikiki lights shimmer along the shoreline. In quieter areas, stars shine brilliantly above black lava fields. The ocean hums in the darkness. Somewhere, a family gathers for dinner. Somewhere, a canoe rests on sand after an early paddle. Somewhere, a child learns their first Hawaiian words. The islands breathe slowly, and as you rest with this final chapter, imagine standing on a quiet beach, warm sand beneath your feet, endless ocean before you, stars stretching across the sky. Hawaii has journeyed through fire, wind, water, and time, and tonight it rests peacefully, just as you can now. Let the waves carry your thoughts gently outward into the vast, calm Pacific and drift into quiet sleep beneath island stars. Number 3. Ancient chiefdoms. As the early Polynesian settlements grew more established across the islands, life in Hawaii began to take on a deeper structure. Villages that once consisted of only a few families slowly expanded. Generations were born on the same shores. Knowledge of the winds, the reefs, the mountains, and the seasons became more refined. Over time, leadership emerged in clearer forms, and the islands entered what we now think of as the era of the ancient chiefdoms. Each island was divided into districts, and each district into smaller land sections that stretched from the mountains down to the sea. This system allowed communities to access everything they needed within their own area. Forests provided wood and birds. Valleys offered fertile soil for taro. The ocean brought fish and salt. Life was organized with careful balance. At the center of this system stood the alii, the chiefs. The alii were not simply political leaders. They were believed to carry sacred power, known as mana. Their authority was both spiritual and practical. They oversaw land distribution, settled disputes, organized labor, and ensured that religious practices were properly observed. Beneath them were skilled priests called kahuna, who guided ceremonies, healing practices, navigation knowledge, and craftsmanship. Farmers, fishermen, canoe builders, and artisans formed the foundation of daily life. Society moved according to a system known as kapu. The kapu system established sacred laws and guidelines that shape behavior. Certain foods were reserved for chiefs. Some places were considered too sacred for common access. Specific rituals marked planting seasons, fishing periods, and times of rest. While the system may seem strict from a modern perspective, it provided order and stability. It connected people to the land, to their leaders, and to the spiritual world they believed surrounded them. Villages were quiet but active. In the early morning, farmers walked to Loikalo, the terraced taro fields fed by fresh mountain streams. Water moved gently through carefully built channels, nourishing each plant before returning to the river. The steady sound of flowing water became part of daily life. Along the shoreline, fishermen prepared nets woven from plant fibers. Canoes rested on sand, carved from large koa trees. Men studied the color of the water and the movement of birds to know where fish gathered beneath the surface. Women prepared kapa cloth from the bark of wake plants, beating it rhythmically until it softened into fabric. Patterns were pressed into the cloth using carved wooden stamps, creating designs that reflected family and place. Children learned by watching. They observed how elders tied fishing knots, how chants were memorized, how stories carried history without written words. Knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. Temples known as heiau were built across the islands. Some stood near the ocean, others on high ridges overlooking valleys. Built from carefully stacked stones, these sacred spaces were places of prayer, offerings, and ceremony. Chiefs consulted priests there before major decisions, whether preparing for planting seasons or, at times, for conflict with rival districts. Because as populations grew, so did competition. Land and resources were precious. Different chiefs sought to strengthen their influence. At times, this led to battles between island districts. Warriors trained with wooden spears and clubs. Canoes carried fighters along coastlines. Yet even conflict followed ritual. There were rules. There were chants before battle. There were ceremonies afterward. Warfare was woven into belief systems, not separated from them. Over centuries, power shifted between islands. Some chiefs gained control over larger territories. Others lost influence. Alliances were formed through marriage. Rivalries faded and returned like changing tides. Despite these shifts, daily life for most people remained steady. The rhythm of planting and harvesting continued. Fishing seasons rotated to prevent depletion. Forests were managed carefully. The Ahupua land system ensured that resources were shared within each district, reducing waste and maintaining sustainability. Hawaiian society during this time was deeply connected to nature. Mountains were not just geography, they were ancestors. The ocean was not only water, it was pathway and provider. Volcanic craters were home to powerful deities. Even winds were named and understood individually. Chants preserved genealogy stretching back to the first voyagers. Oral traditions described the origins of islands rising from the sea. Identity was tied not just to family, but to specific valleys, cliffs, and bays. As centuries passed, certain chiefs rose to greater prominence. On the island of Hawaii, powerful leaders began consolidating larger regions under their authority. Skilled in both diplomacy and warfare, they extended influence across neighboring districts. These gradual expansions laid quiet foundations for what would one day become island-wide unification. But at this stage, Hawaii remained a network of separate chiefdoms. Each island carried its own internal hierarchy. Oahu had its ruling families. Maui and Kauai maintained their own lines of alii. The Big Island often saw strong competition between rival chiefs. Trade and travel between islands continued regularly, canoes crossed channels guided by stars and currents, maintaining connection across the archipelago. Life was rich in ceremony. Makani, the wind, was honored. Lono, associated with fertility and agriculture, was celebrated during Makahiki season, a time of peace, harvest and games. During this season, warfare paused, offerings were made. Athletic competitions and festivities brought communities together. These cycles of peace and preparation created balance. Time was not measured by numbered years, but by seasons, harvests, and generations. As this era matured, Hawaiian society became highly organized and deeply rooted in tradition. Agricultural systems were advanced. Fish ponds were engineered with stone walls to sustainably raise fish along shorelines. Knowledge of astronomy remained strong, guiding both navigation and ceremonial timing. The islands, though separated by water, shared a common culture that was confident and self-sustaining. And yet, beyond the horizon, change was slowly approaching. Unknown to the chiefs and farmers, to the priests and fishermen, the wider world was moving closer. European ships were beginning to explore the vast Pacific. Trade routes were expanding. Curiosity about distant lands was growing. But for now, in this era of ancient chiefdoms, Hawaii remained guided by its own rhythms. The sound of wooden drums echoed across valleys during ceremony. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires at dusk. Waves continued their endless motion against black lava shores. The system of alii, kapu, and carefully divided land had shaped a society both structured and spiritual. And as night settled over the islands, stars filled the sky just as they had for the first voyagers. The chiefdoms stood strong beneath those stars, rooted in tradition, balanced with nature, and unaware that a new chapter waited quietly beyond the horizon. As leadership structures deepened across the islands, the relationships between chiefs became more layered and complex. Power was not fixed. It moved slowly, like currents beneath the surface of the sea. A chief's strength depended not only on warriors, but on alliances, genealogy, and spiritual legitimacy. Lineage mattered deeply. The closer one's ancestry traced to revered ancestors, the stronger their claim to authority. Genealogies were memorized carefully and chanted aloud during formal gatherings. These chants were not hurried. They flowed steadily, connecting present leaders to generations long past. Through them, history remained alive without written record. On each island, districts were overseen by lesser chiefs who pledged loyalty to higher-ranking alii. This layered system created order. Responsibilities were clearly understood. Farmers tended land that was ultimately held in trust by the chiefs, who in turn were expected to ensure prosperity and balance. If crops failed or fishing declined, it was not seen as random misfortune. It could reflect imbalance, spiritual or political. Chiefs were responsible for maintaining harmony between people, land, and the gods. Ceremonies became increasingly elaborate. Large heiau were constructed with carefully placed stones carried by many hands. Some were agricultural temples, honoring Lono for fertile harvests. Others were dedicated to Ku, associated with governance and, at times, warfare. Building a heiau required cooperation. Workers gathered stone from valleys and shorelines. Priests oversaw rituals during construction. Chants filled the air as each stone was placed with intention. These structures were not rushed. They rose gradually, shaped by patience. Meanwhile, the kapu system continued guiding daily conduct. Certain days were reserved for specific activities. Some foods, like pork and bananas, were restricted for women under religious law. Fishing seasons were regulated to prevent depletion. Forest resources were protected through sacred designations. While strict, this system encouraged sustainability. The land was not viewed as property to exhaust, but as a living ancestor to respect. As generations passed, rivalries occasionally intensified. Island channels that once carried peaceful trade also carried war canoes. Conflicts were often brief but decisive. Victorious chiefs expanded territory, sometimes relocating defeated leaders or incorporating their lands into broader control. Yet life for most island residents remained steady through these shifts. Morning routines did not change drastically because of distant leadership disputes. Taro still required tending, nets still required weaving. Children still learned chants beside elders at dusk. Across the islands, specialized knowledge flourished. Canoe builders selected koa trees carefully from mountain forests, offering prayers before cutting them. Navigators continued studying stars and ocean swells, though long-distance voyages became less frequent as island life stabilized. Fish pond engineering advanced further. Massive stone walls curved gracefully along shallow bays, creating enclosed spaces where fish could grow safely before being harvested. These aquaculture systems reflected deep environmental understanding. Population levels grew gradually. With stable agriculture and structured leadership, communities expanded. Villages became more permanent. Pathways connected valleys. Social roles were clearly defined. And as power concentrated among certain ruling families, the stage was quietly being set for larger unifications. On the island of Hawaii, ambitious chiefs sought dominance over neighboring districts more assertively. Through strategy, marriage alliances, and calculated warfare, territories slowly merged. The balance between peace and ambition was delicate. During Makahiki season, warfare paused completely. Tribute was collected in the form of food and goods, presented ceremonially to chiefs. Games were played. Surfing competitions took place along rolling waves. Wrestling matches drew crowds. It was a season of renewal and reflection. Then, when the season ended, political tensions sometimes resumed. Even so, these conflicts were part of an accepted cycle. Authority was not random, it followed ritual and belief. As the 18th century approached, Hawaii's chiefdoms had become highly organized and powerful within their own world. The islands were self-sustaining, culturally rich, and confident in their traditions. No one could yet imagine how dramatically the balance would soon shift. Far beyond the horizon, European explorers were charting unknown waters. Ships equipped with sails far larger than Polynesian canoes were crossing oceans with new intentions: trade, discovery, empire. Soon, these distant movements would intersect with the islands. But for now, Hawaii remained centered in its own system. Stone temples stood firm against trade winds. Chiefs governed from coastal compounds. Fishermen studied tides beneath rising moons. The kapu system held society together like woven fibers in a net. Night after night, the stars that had guided the first voyagers continued shining above the islands. The chiefdoms were strong, structured, sacred, deeply connected to land and sea, and quietly, almost imperceptibly, the world beyond the Pacific was drawing closer. As the island chiefdoms reached their height of structure and influence, a subtle shift began to move through the archipelago, not yet from outside forces but from within. Ambition was growing. On the island of Hawaii, rival chiefs competed for dominance more intensely than before. Fertile districts, protected harbors, and strong warrior alliances became increasingly important. Leadership was no longer only about maintaining balance, it was also about expanding authority. Among these rising leaders was a high-ranking chief, who would later be known for changing the islands forever, Kamehameha. In his early years, he was simply one among many alii of noble lineage. He trained in traditional warfare. He learned strategy, diplomacy, and ceremony. He understood the kapu system deeply, and he respected the spiritual responsibilities of leadership. The political landscape during this time was fluid. District boundaries shifted after conflicts. Alliances were formed through marriage. Chiefs watched one another carefully, measuring strength not only in warriors, but in loyalty and resource control. Battles between rival leaders were decisive but structured. Warriors carried spears, daggers, and wooden clubs. Canoes moved swiftly along coastlines. Before battle, Priests offered chants and blessings, seeking favor from the gods. When victory came, it reshaped authority. Kamehameha gradually proved himself as a capable military strategist. Through a series of conflicts on the Big Island, he consolidated control over large territories. His victories were not chaotic expansions, they were calculated and purposeful. At the same time, something unprecedented was occurring. Foreign ships appeared on the horizon. In 1778, British explorer Captain James Cook arrived in Hawaii. His ships, with tall masts and unfamiliar sails, startled island communities. The sight of metal tools, firearms, and new goods introduced possibilities that had never existed before. For a brief moment, the arrival of these foreigners seemed almost ceremonial. Cook arrived during Makahiki season, a time associated with the god Lono. Some Hawaiians initially interpreted his presence through spiritual understanding. Exchanges occurred, trade began. Curiosity moved in both directions, but misunderstandings soon followed. Cultural differences, shifting expectations, and tension led to conflict. Eventually, Cook was killed during a confrontation on the Big Island. The encounter left a lasting impression on both Hawaiians and Europeans. Though Cook's visit was short, its impact was long. Foreign trade slowly increased afterward. Ships returned seeking fresh water, food, and sandalwood. In exchange, they offered firearms and metal weapons, tools that would soon change the balance of power between rival chiefs. Kamehameha recognized the opportunity. He acquired firearms and cannons through trade with Western sailors. He also received training and advice from a few foreigners who chose to remain in the islands. With these new tools, his military strength grew significantly. One by one, he challenged rival chiefs across the islands. The Battle of Mokuhai secured his control over Hawaii Island. Later campaigns extended his reach toward Maui and Oahu. Each victory expanded his influence, though not without resistance. The battles were intense, yet structured within traditional frameworks. Canoes still carried warriors across channels. Chants still preceded combat. But now, muskets echoed alongside traditional weapons. By 1795, after decisive victories including the Battle of Nuuanu on Oahu, Kamehameha gained control over most of the archipelago. Kauai remained independent briefly, but eventually submitted peacefully through negotiation rather than warfare. For the first time in Hawaiian history, the islands were unified under a single ruler. Kamehameha I became the sole monarch of a unified Hawaiian kingdom. Unification brought stability. Inter-island warfare ceased. Trade increased. Agricultural systems continued functioning, now under centralized authority. Kamehameha maintained many traditional practices while carefully managing foreign relationships. He understood balance. While embracing certain Western tools and advisors, he preserved Hawaiian customs and religious structures. The kapu system remained intact. Chiefs retained roles beneath the monarchy. Society did not transform overnight. Daily life continued. Farmers tended taro. Fishermen cast nets. Canoe builders shaped koa wood. Children learned chants and genealogy. Yet beneath this familiar rhythm, Hawaii had changed profoundly. It was no longer a collection of rival chiefdoms. It was a kingdom. Foreign ships visited more frequently. Trade in sandalwood grew rapidly, connecting Hawaii to global markets in China and beyond. Western clothing, tools, and ideas circulated more widely. Still, in the quiet evenings, the islands felt much the same. The ocean rolled steadily against lava shores. Trade winds cooled warm afternoons. Heiau stood against the sky, though new influences were slowly entering spiritual life. As Kamehameha aged, he focused on maintaining peace and preparing succession. His rule had transformed the political landscape permanently. When he passed in 1819, leadership transitioned to his son, Liliʻuokalani, known as Kamehameha II, and with that transition, another turning point quietly approached. For soon, decisions would be made that would alter the spiritual foundation of Hawaiian society itself. But for now, the islands rested under unified leadership. From scattered chiefdoms to a single kingdom, Hawaii had entered a new era, shaped by strength, adaptation, and careful navigation between tradition and change. The stars above still shone as they always had. The ocean still moved with patient rhythm. Yet the horizon was no longer empty, and the story of Hawaii was only beginning its next transformation. After the passing of Kamehameha I, the islands remained unified, yet the stability he had carefully built began to shift in quiet but powerful ways. His son, Kamehameha II, inherited a kingdom that was strong, respected, and increasingly connected to the outside world. Foreign ships continued to arrive, bringing trade goods, new technologies, and unfamiliar ideas. Advisors from Europe and America were now regular figures at court. But the most dramatic change did not come from foreigners. It came from within. In 1819, shortly after ascending to the throne, Kamehameha II made a decision that would transform Hawaiian society. Influenced by powerful female chiefs, including Queen Kamehameha I, he chose to dismantle the ancient kapu system. The sacred laws that had guided Hawaiian life for centuries were suddenly lifted. Men and women ate together publicly, breaking long-standing religious restriction. Temples were abandoned, idols were removed. The structured spiritual framework that had once defined daily life dissolved almost overnight. For many, it was a moment of uncertainty. The kapu system had shaped governance, agriculture, ceremony, and social order. Without it, Hawaii entered unfamiliar territory. Yet the transition was not chaotic. It unfolded gradually as leaders sought new foundations for unity. Soon after, Christian missionaries arrived from New England in 1820. They brought with them Bibles, printing presses, and a desire to convert the Hawaiian people. At first, they were cautious observers, but over time, they gained influence within the royal court. Hawaiians proved eager learners. Missionaries worked with Hawaiian leaders to develop a written version of the Hawaiian language. Schools were established. Literacy spread rapidly across the islands. Within a few decades, Hawaii became one of the most literate societies in the world. Churches were built where heiau once stood. Hymns replaced chants in many public spaces. Western-style clothing became more common. Laws began reflecting Christian values. Yet even as new beliefs spread, traditional identity did not disappear entirely. Cultural memory remained present in language, storytelling, and connection to land. Meanwhile, trade expanded steadily. Sandalwood exports connected Hawaii to China. Whaling ships stopped regularly in Hawaiian ports, especially in Lahaina and Honolulu. Sailors filled streets during shore leave. Taverns and shops appeared to serve them. The kingdom's economy became increasingly tied to global markets. Sugar cultivation began expanding in the mid-1800s. Fertile land, warm climate, and growing international demand made sugar plantations profitable. Large-scale agriculture slowly replaced smaller traditional systems in some areas. Labor demands increased. To meet plantation needs, workers were recruited from China, Japan, Portugal, the Philippines, and other regions. Over time, Hawaii's population became more diverse than ever before. Plantation towns formed around fields of sugarcane. Life there was structured and routine. Workers rose early, cut cane under the sun, and returned home in the evening. Though labor was demanding, communities formed strong cultural bonds. Traditions from many countries blended into island life. The Hawaiian monarchy continued navigating complex relationships with foreign powers. Western nations recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom diplomatically. Treaties were signed. Embassies were established abroad. Hawaii stood as an independent nation, though increasingly influenced by foreign economic interests. In 1840, a written constitution was established. The monarchy shifted toward a constitutional framework, limiting royal authority and introducing legislative governance. Land ownership systems also changed through the Great Mahele, redistributing land and allowing private property ownership. These reforms were intended to protect Hawaii's sovereignty in a changing world. But they also had unintended consequences. Many native Hawaiians, unfamiliar with Western legal systems, lost ancestral lands over time. Foreign investors and businessmen gained increasing control of valuable agricultural property. Still, daily life continued with familiar rhythms. Fishing villages remained active along quiet shores. Taro fields were tended in fertile valleys. Children attended mission schools by day and listened to traditional stories by night. The islands were changing, not suddenly but steadily. Honolulu grew into a bustling port city. Government buildings rose near the waterfront. Streets filled with merchants speaking many languages. And above it all, the monarchy sought to preserve Hawaiian identity while adapting to global pressures. The ocean, as always, surrounded everything. Ships came and went. Trade winds carried the scent of salt and sugarcane. Even as politics grew more complicated, sunsets over the Pacific remained unchanged. The unified kingdom had survived its first major transformations: the fall of Kapu, the rise of Christianity, constitutional governance, and economic modernization. Yet new tensions were quietly forming. Economic power was shifting increasingly into the hands of foreign businessmen. Political influence followed closely behind. The monarchy still stood, but its authority faced growing challenge. As the 19th century moved forward, Hawaii would enter one of the most delicate periods in its history, a time when independence, identity, and sovereignty would be tested. For now, though, the islands continued their gentle rhythm. Waves brushed softly against harbor docks. Sugar fields swayed in the wind. Church bells rang where temple drums once echoed. Hawaii was no longer a network of chiefdoms, nor simply a unified kingdom untouched by the world. It was becoming something new, balanced carefully between tradition and transformation, and the horizon, once distant and quiet, now carried the weight of approaching change. As the 19th century moved forward, the Hawaiian Kingdom continued walking a careful line between independence and growing foreign influence. Sugar had become the center of the economy. Plantations stretched across Oahu, Maui, and the Big Island. Tall green stalks swayed in long rows beneath the sun. Mills operated steadily, crushing cane and boiling juice into raw sugar for export. Ships carried these goods primarily to the United States, where demand was rising. With sugar came wealth, but also imbalance. Many plantation owners were American or European businessmen who had settled in the islands. Over time, their economic power translated into political influence. They formed advisory circles, commercial organizations, and reform groups that quietly shaped legislation. Honolulu grew busier. Horse-drawn carriages moved through dusty streets. Government officials met in wooden buildings near the harbor. Newspapers printed in both Hawaiian and English circulated widely, discussing trade agreements, land policy, and royal decisions. The monarchy, now under King Kalakaua in the late 1800s, sought to restore pride in Hawaiian identity. Kalakaua celebrated traditional culture openly. He revived hula performances at court, encouraged the preservation of chants, and promoted Hawaiian arts and language. Under his reign, Iolani Palace was constructed, a grand royal residence symbolizing sovereignty and modern statehood. The palace stood in Honolulu with electric lighting before even the White House in Washington had such technology. It reflected both progress and dignity, yet political tension was rising beneath the surface. Foreign businessmen worried that policies favoring Hawaiian leadership might threaten their economic interests. In 1887, under pressure from an armed militia largely composed of foreign residents, King Kalakaua was forced to sign a new constitution. It became known as the Bayonet Constitution. This document significantly limited the power of the monarchy and expanded voting rights for foreign residents, while restricting voting eligibility for many native Hawaiians and Asian laborers. Authority shifted further away from the crown and toward wealthy business elites. Though the kingdom remained formally independent, real control was becoming divided. After Kalakaua's passing, his sister, Queen Liliʻuokalani, ascended the throne in 1891. She was determined to restore authority to the monarchy and protect Hawaiian sovereignty. Calm but firm, she proposed a new constitution that would strengthen royal power and return political voice to native Hawaiians. Her intentions alarmed powerful business leaders. In January 1893, a group of American and European businessmen, supported by U.S. Minister John L. Stevens and a small contingent of U.S. Marines, moved to overthrow the monarchy. The event unfolded quickly. Government buildings were seized. A provisional government was declared. Queen Liliʻuokalani, wishing to avoid bloodshed, yielded her authority under protest, trusting that the United States would later restore lawful governance. But restoration never came. The provisional government sought annexation to the United States. Though initially delayed, momentum continued building. In 1894, the Republic of Hawaii was declared, replacing the monarchy entirely. The royal era had ended. Iolani Palace, once filled with ceremony and music, became a government building. The Hawaiian flag was lowered. A new chapter had begun, not through gradual cultural evolution, but through political overthrow. Daily life for many residents continued outwardly unchanged. Plantation workers still rose before sunrise. Fishing boats still moved across calm waters. Markets still opened in Honolulu streets. Yet beneath these routines, something profound had shifted. Hawaii was no longer a sovereign kingdom. It was now governed by leaders closely aligned with American business interests. In 1898, during the Spanish-American War, strategic concerns in the Pacific accelerated events. The United States formally annexed Hawaii through a joint resolution of Congress. The islands became a U.S. territory. American laws, institutions, and administrative systems gradually replaced remaining structures of the former kingdom. English grew more dominant in schools. Hawaiian language use declined in public settings. Still, cultural memory endured quietly. Families preserved stories of the monarchy. Songs were composed honoring the Queen. Traditions survived in homes, even if discouraged in official spaces. Plantations continued operating at large scale. Immigrant communities grew stronger and more rooted. Japanese, Filipino, Chinese, Portuguese, and others built neighborhoods, temples, churches, and schools. A blended local culture slowly formed, unique to Hawaii. Honolulu expanded steadily into the 20th century. Harbor facilities improved, roads were paved, electric streetcars moved through town, military presence increased, especially at Pearl Harbor. The unified kingdom that had once balanced tradition and modernization was gone. In its place stood a U.S. territory shaped by commerce, agriculture, and strategic military value. And yet, as always, the islands themselves remained unchanged in their deeper rhythms. The ocean continued its steady breathing. Trade winds cooled warm afternoons. Rain fell softly in green valleys. Empires and governments shifted, but the land endured. And as the 20th century approached, Hawaii stood once again at the edge of transformation, entering a new era under foreign rule while quietly carrying the memory of its kingdom within. Number 5. Overthrow and annexation. With the monarchy set aside and the Republic of Hawaii declared in 1894, the islands entered a period of political adjustment that felt both steady and uncertain. The royal court was no longer active. Iolani Palace, once alive with ceremony, music, and diplomatic gatherings, became an administrative center for the new government. Flags changed. Official documents bore different seals. Yet beyond these symbols, daily life continued in familiar ways. Plantations remained the economic backbone of the islands. Sugarcane fields stretched wide under the sun. Workers moved methodically through rows with tools in hand. Steam-powered mills hummed through long afternoons, processing harvested cane into raw sugar for shipment abroad. Ships lined Honolulu harbor carrying goods primarily to the United States. The leaders of the Republic were largely businessmen and lawyers, many of American or European descent. They believed closer ties with the United States would strengthen economic stability and political security. Annexation became their central goal. At first, the process was slow. Some leaders in the United States hesitated. There were debates in Washington about legality and morality. Investigations acknowledged that the overthrow of Queen Liliʻuokalani had occurred with questionable support from U.S. officials. For a time, annexation did not move forward. But global events shifted priorities. In 1898, as the Spanish-American War expanded American influence across the Pacific, Hawaii's strategic location gained new importance. The islands were seen as a vital naval base and refueling station for ships traveling between North America and Asia. That same year, the United States formally annexed Hawaii through a joint resolution of Congress. Without a public vote by the Hawaiian people, the islands became an American territory. The transition was administrative rather than dramatic. There were no large public ceremonies marking resistance. Life moved quietly forward, though feelings among native Hawaiians were often complex, ranging from resignation to quiet sorrow. In 1900, the Organic Act established the territory of Hawaii. An appointed governor, rather than a monarch, now led the government. A territorial legislature was formed. American legal systems became fully integrated. English became the primary language of instruction in schools. The Hawaiian language, once spoken fluently across the islands, began to fade from official use, yet it survived in homes, in songs, and in whispered conversations among elders. Meanwhile, plantation labor demands continued shaping demographics. Immigration increased significantly. Workers from Japan arrived in large numbers, followed by Filipinos, Koreans, and others. Camps formed near fields, with modest wooden homes arranged in rows. Each ethnic group brought traditions, food, language, and faith. Over time, these cultures blended gently. Local markets offered rice, fresh fish, tropical fruits, and baked bread influenced by Portuguese settlers. Buddhist temples stood near Christian churches. Festivals combined elements from many heritages. Hawaii was becoming uniquely multicultural. Honolulu expanded steadily in the early 20th century. Streetcars clattered along tracks. Businesses opened along King Street and Fort Street. Schools and government buildings grew in number. Yet outside the capital, many areas remained rural and quiet. On the shores of Oahu, Pearl Harbor gained increasing military significance. The United States invested heavily in expanding naval facilities. Docks were reinforced. Shipyards grew. Military housing appeared nearby. Uniformed service members became common figures in local communities. Still, despite political change and economic growth, much of life retained its island pace. Fishermen continued rising before dawn. Farmers tended taro patches in valleys where irrigation channels had flowed for centuries. Children played near streams and beaches, their laughter carried by trade winds. For native Hawaiians, cultural expression often moved into quieter spaces. Hula performances continued, though sometimes reshaped for tourist audiences. Traditional chants were preserved by dedicated practitioners. Family histories were shared orally, keeping memory alive even when public recognition diminished. As the territory settled into American governance, a new generation grew up knowing only territorial status. The kingdom existed now in memory and story. The monarchy became part of history lessons rather than daily life, yet identity remained strong. The land still held ancient names. Mountains and valleys carried stories older than any government. The ocean has always remained both protector and pathway. The early decades of territorial life were marked by adaptation. Economic systems deepened around sugar and pineapple. Immigration reshaped communities. Military presence strengthened. Hawaii had moved from unified kingdom to republic, and now to American territory, all within a single lifetime. The transformation had been swift by historical standards, though on the ground it felt gradual. And as the 20th century unfolded, another global event would soon bring Hawaii into the center of world history in a way no one could have fully anticipated. For now, the islands rested under territorial governance, adjusting quietly, carrying memory gently, and watching the horizon once more. Part 2, as the territory of Hawaii settled into the early 20th century, the islands became more tightly woven into America's economic and military systems. Sugar remained dominant, but pineapples soon followed. Large agricultural companies expanded operations, controlling vast areas of land. Brands like Dole and others shipped canned pineapple across the United States. Rail lines carried harvests from inland fields to coastal ports. Plantation life developed its own rhythm. Whistles marking work hours, communal bathhouses, modest wooden homes lined in rows. Labor was demanding. Workers from Japan, the Philippines, Portugal, China, and Korea signed contracts and labored long hours in humid fields. Wages were modest, yet plantation camps became centers of cultural exchange. Languages mixed, recipes blended. Children from different backgrounds played together after school. Out of this blending, a distinct local identity slowly formed. Meanwhile, Honolulu continued modernizing. Electric lights brightened streets at night. Automobiles replaced horse-drawn carriages. Schools followed American curricula. English dominated classrooms, and use of the Hawaiian language in public education was discouraged. Yet culture never disappeared completely. Hula adapted for stage performances in Waikiki hotels. Musicians carried steel guitars and ukuleles into growing tourist spaces. Though sometimes commercialized, these expressions kept tradition visible. Tourism itself was beginning to rise. Steamships brought travelers seeking warm weather and ocean views. Waikiki Beach became increasingly popular. Hotels expanded along the shoreline. The image of Hawaii as paradise began spreading through postcards and advertisements. At the same time, Pearl Harbor's importance deepened. The U.S. Navy invested heavily in fortifying the harbor. Battleships docked along reinforced piers. Airfields were constructed. Military families moved into nearby housing. Uniforms became a common sight in Honolulu streets. The islands were no longer just agricultural hubs, they were strategic military outposts in the Pacific. Then came December 7, 1941. On a quiet Sunday morning, Japanese aircraft launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Bombs fell across battleships. Smoke rose into the sky. The stillness of the harbor shattered into chaos. More than 2,000 people lost their lives that day. The attack propelled the United States into World War II. For Hawaii, life changed instantly. Martial law was declared across the territory. Military authority replaced civilian control. Blackouts were enforced at night. Beaches were restricted. Soldiers patrolled streets. Rationing affected daily life. Yet island residents adapted. Plantation workers continued harvesting crops vital to the war effort. Women entered new roles in offices and support services. Military construction expanded airfields and bases across several islands. The war brought economic activity but also tension. Japanese Americans in Hawaii faced suspicion, though large-scale internment, as seen on the mainland, was more limited due to the territory's heavy Japanese ancestry population. Many local Japanese Americans served bravely in U.S. military units, including the highly decorated 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Through hardship, communities remained interconnected. When the war ended in 1945, Hawaii emerged transformed. Military infrastructure remained extensive. Air travel technology improved dramatically during wartime, making future civilian flights faster and more accessible. The plantation economy, though still present, began slowly declining in relative importance. Tourism accelerated in the post-war years. Airlines began offering regular commercial flights. Visitors arrived in growing numbers. Waikiki's skyline rose higher with new hotels. Surf culture gained global attention. The territory was changing once again. With a diverse population, strategic importance, and growing economy, conversations about statehood intensified. Many residents believed Hawaii deserved full representation in Congress and equal status within the United States. Campaigns for statehood grew stronger during the 1950s. Debates unfolded in Washington. Supporters emphasized Hawaii's loyalty during World War II and its multicultural population living under American law for decades. Finally, in 1959, a vote was held. An overwhelming majority of Hawaii's residents supported becoming a U.S. state. On August 21, 1959, Hawaii officially became the 50th state of the United States. Church bells rang, celebrations filled the streets, American flags waved alongside local pride. The long journey from kingdom to republic to territory had reached a new constitutional status. Yet even in celebration, history remained layered. For some, statehood represented opportunity and equality. For others, it marked the final step away from lost sovereignty. Still, daily life moved forward. Tourism expanded rapidly through the 1960s and beyond. High-rise hotels lined Waikiki. Surf competitions drew global audiences. Hawaii became internationally known as a symbol of relaxation and natural beauty. But beneath the modern skyline, deeper currents of identity continued flowing. The memory of the kingdom was not erased. It lived in songs, in family stories, in the Hawaiian language spoken quietly at home. The islands had endured war, economic shifts, and political transformation. From plantation fields to naval harbors, from territorial rule to statehood, Hawaii had entered a new era once again. And still, beyond politics and industry, the Pacific Ocean continued its steady rhythm against the shore, unchanged, patient, and eternal. Part 3 statehood brought celebration, but it also opened a new and complex chapter for Hawaii. With full representation in the United States, federal funding increased. Infrastructure projects expanded, highways stretched across Oahu. Airports grew larger to accommodate rising tourism. Suburban neighborhoods replaced former plantation lands. The economy shifted rapidly. By the 1960s and 1970s, sugar and pineapple were no longer the dominant forces they once had been. Tourism became the primary driver of growth. Jet travel made Hawaii accessible to millions. Waikiki transformed into a skyline of hotels. Beachfront resorts appeared on Maui and Kauai. Visitors arrived seeking paradise. Surf culture spread globally. Images of palm trees, luau's, and sunsets filled magazines and television screens. Hawaii became both a destination and a symbol. Peaceful, tropical, welcoming. Yet beneath the postcard image, deeper conversations were unfolding. Many native Hawaiians began re-examining their history. The overthrow of the monarchy, the loss of land, the decline of language. A cultural awakening slowly gained strength during the 1970s, often called the Hawaiian Renaissance. Traditional practices resurfaced with renewed pride. Hula was reclaimed as sacred storytelling rather than just performance. Hawaiian music evolved, blending modern instruments with ancient chants. Artists and scholars worked to preserve oral histories and revive cultural knowledge. One powerful symbol of this revival was the voyaging canoe Hokulea. Built in 1975, it sailed across the Pacific using only traditional navigation, guided by stars, swells, and wind patterns. Its successful voyage proved the extraordinary skill of ancient Polynesian navigators and restored confidence in ancestral knowledge. Language revival followed. Immersion schools opened where children learned entirely in Olelo, Hawaii. Words that had nearly faded from public life returned to classrooms and homes. A new generation began speaking the language of their ancestors fluently. Meanwhile, political awareness grew. Some Native Hawaiians advocated for federal recognition similar to Native American tribes. Others supported sovereignty movements seeking greater autonomy or even independence. These conversations were complex, layered, and ongoing. Environmental protection also became central. Development had brought economic growth, but it also strained ecosystems. Coral reefs faced bleaching, native forests battled invasive species. Activists and scientists worked together to protect sacred lands and fragile habitats. The phrase malamaina, care for the land, gained renewed importance. Renewable energy projects expanded. Solar panels appeared across rooftops. Wind farms turned slowly on open hillsides. Hawaii set ambitious goals for sustainability, recognizing its vulnerability as an island state dependent on imports. Military presence remained significant. Pearl Harbor continued operating as a major U.S. naval base. Service members and their families contributed to local communities, adding further layers to Hawaii's multicultural identity. And multicultural it had become. Japanese, Filipino, Chinese, Portuguese, Korean, Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian, and mainland American influences blended into everyday life. Local cuisine reflected this harmony. Poke bowls, spam musubi, plate lunches, malasadas, fresh fish, rice, and taro, all sharing space at the table. In neighborhoods across the islands, children grew up navigating multiple cultural traditions naturally. Modern Hawaii balanced many identities at once. It was American, yet distinct, modern, yet ancient, global, yet deeply local. Skyscrapers stood in Honolulu, while sacred valleys remained quiet and green. Advanced telescopes studied the cosmos from Mauna Kea, while cultural practitioners offered chants at sunrise on the same mountain. The islands continued evolving. Climate change brought rising sea levels and stronger storms. Policymakers debated housing affordability as tourism drove property values higher. Residents sought ways to preserve community while welcoming visitors respectfully. Through all of it, daily life maintained a certain softness. Sunsets still painted the sky in shades of gold and violet. Trade winds cooled warm afternoons. Waves rolled patiently onto black lava shores. The journey from ancient chiefdoms to unified kingdom to overthrow and annexation to territory and statehood had been long and transformative. Now, Hawaii stands as the 50th state, shaped by history, guided by resilience, and sustained by the enduring spirit of its people. The ocean that once carried the first Polynesian voyagers still surrounds the islands. It has witnessed every chapter. And as night settles once more over the Pacific, lights shimmer along Waikiki while stars glow brightly above quiet valleys. Empires changed, governments shifted, economies evolved, but the land remains, the waves continue, and Hawaii's story, layered, powerful, and still unfolding, moves gently forward beneath the same endless sky. Number 6. World War and Transformation. By the early 20th century, Hawaii had settled into its role as an American territory, economically driven by plantations and strategically valued by the United States military. Sugar and pineapple dominated the landscape. Rail lines cut across fields. Smoke rose from processing mills. Plantation whistles marked the beginning and end of long workdays. Communities formed in neat rows of modest wooden homes, where families from Japan, the Philippines, Portugal, China, and elsewhere built new lives. At the same time, Pearl Harbor was quietly becoming one of the most important naval bases in the Pacific. Dry docks were expanded, battleships anchored along reinforced piers, airfields were constructed nearby. The territory's location, thousands of miles from the mainland, made it a crucial midpoint between North America and Asia. Honolulu grew busier each year. Streetcars moved through town. Shops displayed goods from around the world. English dominated schools and government offices, though many households still spoke Japanese, Ilocano, Cantonese, Portuguese, or Hawaiian at home. Life felt steady. But beyond the horizon, global tensions were rising. In Europe and Asia, war had already begun. Imperial ambitions were reshaping alliances. Though far from those battlefields, Hawaii's strategic position made it impossible to remain untouched. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, the stillness broke. Just before 8 a.m., Japanese aircraft appeared in the skies above Oahu. Within minutes, bombs and torpedoes struck battleships anchored at Pearl Harbor. Smoke billowed upward. Sirens wailed across the harbor. The sound of explosions echoed against nearby hills. The attack lasted less than 2 hours, but its impact changed the course of history. More than 2,000 lives were lost. Much of the Pacific Fleet was damaged or destroyed, and the United States entered World War II. For Hawaii, daily life transformed overnight. Martial law was declared. Civilian government authority was suspended, replaced by military control. Curfews were imposed. Blackouts darkened city streets at night. Beaches were closed. Barbed wire appeared along certain shorelines. Uniformed soldiers filled public spaces. Rationing limited sugar, gasoline, and other supplies. Identity checks became common. Newspapers were censored. The relaxed island rhythm tightened under wartime urgency. Yet communities adapted quickly. Plantations continued operating to support the war effort. Military construction expanded airfields, roads, and housing. Thousands of additional troops arrived, bringing new energy and tension to local life. Japanese Americans in Hawaii faced suspicion after the attack. However, because they made up such a large portion of the population, mass internment, as seen on the mainland, was limited in the islands. Many local Japanese Americans chose to demonstrate loyalty by volunteering for military service. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, composed largely of Japanese Americans from Hawaii and the mainland, became one of the most highly decorated units in U.S. military history. Back home, families waited anxiously for news from distant battlefields. The war years were marked by both fear and unity. Air raid drills became routine. Children practiced emergency procedures at school. At night, Honolulu glowed dimly under blackout rules, stars appearing brighter than ever above darkened streets. Despite tension, cultural life did not disappear. Music continued softly in homes. Families gathered when possible. Shared hardships strengthened bonds across ethnic communities. When the war ended in 1945, Hawaii was no longer the same. Military infrastructure remained extensive. Air travel technology had advanced rapidly during wartime, making long-distance flights faster and more reliable. The islands were now firmly positioned as America's gateway to the Pacific. The plantation economy began slowly declining in relative importance. Sugar and pineapple still operated, but tourism and military spending grew stronger. The war had accelerated modernization, roads were improved, communications expanded, the population increased. Hawaii had endured shock and transformation within a few short years. From a quiet territorial outpost to a central stage of global conflict, the islands had experienced history at full force. And as peace settled once more over Pearl Harbor's calm waters, a new question began rising among residents. If Hawaii had stood firmly with the United States during war, if its people had served and sacrificed, should it remain only a territory? The path towards statehood was beginning to take clearer shape, but for now, the islands breathed again in relative calm. Ships moved gently in and out of harbor. Trade winds returned to carrying only the scent of salt and distant rain. The memory of smoke lingered in stories, but the horizon looked open once more. Hawaii had been tested, and it had changed. The end of World War II did more than restore peace. It reshaped Hawaii's identity. The war had proven how vital the islands were to the United States. Soldiers stationed there returned home with stories of tropical mountains and warm trade winds. Air travel, improved by wartime innovation, now made long-distance journeys faster and more practical. Hawaii no longer felt so distant. At the same time, local residents were changing politically. Plantation systems that had once tightly controlled labor were weakening. Workers from different ethnic backgrounds, Japanese, Filipino, Hawaiian, Portuguese, and others, began organizing together. Labor strikes in the 1940s reshaped power structures that had favored large plantation owners for decades. A new political voice was rising. The Democratic Revolution of 1954 dramatically shifted Hawaii's leadership away from the long-dominant Republican business elite. Working-class communities gained stronger representation. The territory began moving toward a more locally driven political future. And alongside political change came a powerful movement for statehood. Supporters argued that Hawaii had proven its loyalty. Residents paid federal taxes. Thousands had served bravely in the war. Yet, as a territory, they lacked full voting representation in Congress and could not vote for the U.S. president. The question became harder to ignore. Petitions circulated. Campaigns intensified. Public discussions filled newspapers and town halls. Many residents believed statehood would bring equality and stability. There were also concerns. Some feared increased federal control. Others worried about cultural dilution. Native Hawaiians in particular continued grappling with the earlier overthrow of their monarchy and the long-term loss of sovereignty. Still, momentum built. On March 12, 1959, the U.S. Congress passed the Hawaii Admission Act. Months later, on August 21, 1959, Hawaii officially became the 50th state of the United States. Celebrations erupted across the islands. Church bells rang. Parades filled the streets. American flags waved beside the Hawaiian state flag, a symbol that still carried the Union Jack in its corner, reflecting layers of history. But statehood was not an ending. It was another transformation. With official state status, federal funding expanded. Infrastructure projects accelerated. Tourism began growing rapidly, fueled by jet travel in the 1960s. Hotels rose along Waikiki Beach. Visitors arrived in increasing numbers, drawn by images of paradise. Plantations slowly declined. Sugar and pineapple fields that once dominated the economy gradually closed or downsized. The economic center shifted toward tourism, construction, and military presence. Honolulu's skyline climbed higher. Suburbs expanded outward. Highways connected communities across Oahu. Air travel made inter-island trips faster and more common. Hawaii was becoming more modern, more connected, and more urban. Yet beneath this development, deeper reflections were unfolding. Many native Hawaiians began re-examining their history, the overthrow, annexation, and cultural suppression of earlier generations. By the 1970s, a cultural awakening known as the Hawaiian Renaissance gained strength. Language revival programs opened. Hula traditions were reclaimed as sacred storytelling rather than tourist entertainment. Musicians blended traditional chants with modern instruments. In 1975, the voyaging canoe Hokulea launched. Using only traditional navigation techniques, guided by stars and ocean swells, it successfully sailed across the Pacific, proving the extraordinary knowledge of ancient Polynesian navigators. The voyage restored pride in ancestral wisdom. Hawaii now balanced many identities at once. American state, Pacific crossroads, ancient homeland, modern tourist destination. The journey from independent kingdom to U.S. state had been filled with upheaval, resilience, and reinvention. And while statehood placed a final star on the American flag, Hawaii's deeper story, shaped by ocean voyages, royal legacies, war, labor movements, and cultural revival, continued flowing forward like the tides around its shores. The islands had entered a new era, but their spirit remained rooted in something far older than any political boundary. The land, the ocean, and the enduring memory of those who first crossed the Pacific, guided only by stars. Statehood brought celebration, but it also introduced new challenges that would shape modern Hawaii. As tourism expanded through the 1960s and 72nd, the islands became one of the world's most recognizable destinations. Jet aircraft made travel easier than ever. Waikiki transformed into a skyline of high-rise hotels. Resorts spread across Maui, Kauai, and the Big Island. The economy boomed, but rapid growth came with pressure. Land once used for farming or left untouched began turning into subdivisions and luxury properties. Housing prices rose. many local families found it harder to afford property in the communities where they had lived for generations. At the same time, native Hawaiian activism grew stronger. In 1978, Hawaii held a constitutional convention that created the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, OHA, aimed at addressing native Hawaiian rights and resources. The Hawaiian language was recognized as an official state language alongside English. What had once been nearly silenced was now protected by law. Immersion schools expanded. A new generation grew up speaking Galelo Hawaii fluently. Cultural festivals celebrated traditional navigation, chant, and dance not as performances for visitors, but as living heritage. The protection of sacred land became a powerful issue. From Kahulawe, once used as a military bombing range, to Mauna Kea, where telescopes stand atop a sacred mountain, debates over land use sparked emotional public movements. For many, these struggles were not just environmental, they were spiritual and historical. Meanwhile, Hawaii's multicultural identity deepened. Plate lunches blended Asian, Hawaiian, and American influences. Pidgin English became a shared everyday language across communities. Festivals honored Japanese Obon traditions, Filipino fiestas, Portuguese Holy Ghost celebrations, and Hawaiian Makahiki season. The islands were a mosaic. Military presence remained strong, continuing to anchor Hawaii's strategic importance in the Pacific. Pearl Harbor, once scarred by attack, became both an active base and a memorial site visited by millions each year. Tourism, however, remained the dominant economic engine. By the early 2000s, millions of visitors arrived annually. While tourism created jobs, it also strained infrastructure, beaches, and ecosystems. Coral reefs suffered bleaching. Native forests battled invasive species. Rising sea levels began threatening coastal communities. Climate change became an undeniable concern. As an island chain in the middle of the Pacific, Hawaii faces environmental vulnerability more directly than most U.S. states. Renewable energy projects expanded. Solar panels and wind turbines appeared across the landscape as the state committed to ambitious clean energy goals. Then, in 2020, global events once again reminded Hawaii of its dependence on tourism. The COVID-19 pandemic caused visitor numbers to collapse almost overnight. Hotels emptied, flights were cancelled. The economic impact was severe, but it also gave the islands a rare moment of quiet. Beaches grew less crowded. Wildlife returned to calmer shores. Many residents began asking deeper questions. What should Hawaii's future look like? How can economic stability balance with cultural respect and environmental care? Today, Hawaii continues navigating these questions. It remains the 50th state, yet its identity reaches far beyond a single star on flag. It is Polynesian at heart, American in governance, Asian and Pacific in cultural rhythm, global in visibility. Its history carries both pride and pain. From ancient voyagers guided by stars, to royal unification under Kamehameha, to overthrow and annexation, to war, statehood, and cultural revival, each chapter has layered itself upon the last. Yet the ocean remains constant. Waves still roll across black lava shores. Trade winds still sweep down green valleys. The same constellations that once guided double-hulled canoes still shine over Mauna Kea at night. Empires have changed, governments have shifted, economies have risen and fallen, but Hawaii endures, not just as a place of beaches and postcards, but as a living story of resilience, identity, and connection to land and sea. And that story is still being written, carried forward with every sunrise over the Pacific horizon. Number 7. Cultural Renaissance. As Hawaii settled into life as America's newest state, the islands entered a quieter but deeply meaningful transformation. Beneath the growing skyline of hotels and the steady arrival of tourists, many residents began looking inward, searching for connections to traditions that had once been pushed aside. For decades, native Hawaiian language, customs, and spiritual practices had slowly faded from everyday public life. Schools had emphasized English. Cultural ceremonies were often simplified for tourist entertainment. Younger generations sometimes grew up knowing little about ancestral stories or ancient navigation traditions. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, a new wave of reflection began moving across the islands. Local scholars, artists, musicians, and community elders started sharing knowledge that had been preserved quietly within families. They spoke about the importance of land stewardship, known as malamaina, which teaches respect for the environment as a living relative rather than simply a resource. Cultural gatherings became more frequent. Traditional chants, once rarely heard outside ceremonial settings, slowly returned to public spaces. Hula, which carries history and storytelling through graceful movement, was reintroduced as a sacred art form instead of just a stage performance for visitors. Families encouraged children to learn older songs and oral traditions. Elders shared stories about village life before modern development, describing fishing routines guided by moon phases and planting cycles shaped by rainfall patterns. The Hawaiian language began to reawaken. For many years, only a small number of fluent speakers remained, mostly elderly residents who had learned it naturally as children. Educators and community leaders recognized that language carried cultural memory, and without it, important ways of thinking and understanding the world could disappear. Language preservation programs quietly expanded. Small classrooms opened where children learned to speak, read, and write. In Olelo, Hawaii, teachers combined traditional storytelling with modern education methods, allowing students to grow comfortable using the language in daily conversation. These early efforts required patience. There were limited textbooks. Many teachers created learning materials themselves, drawing from historical archives and family knowledge. Parents volunteered time, helping build community schools where Hawaiian language immersion could thrive. At the same time, music played a powerful role in cultural renewal. Local musicians blended traditional instruments like the EPU drum and slack key guitar with modern sounds. Lyrics often celebrated mountains, ocean currents, and ancestral villages. Songs carried gentle reminders of identity and belonging. Radio stations began playing more local music, allowing listeners to reconnect with sounds that reflected their own heritage. Perhaps one of the most symbolic moments of this cultural renaissance came through the revival of traditional ocean navigation. For generations, stories told of ancient Polynesian voyagers who crossed vast distances of open ocean without compasses or modern instruments. They navigated using stars, wave patterns, wind direction, bird behavior, and ocean swells. Some historians once questioned whether such voyages were truly possible. In the 1970s, Hawaiian cultural leaders decided to prove the wisdom of their ancestors through action. They began constructing a traditional double-hulled voyaging canoe, modeled after designs used centuries earlier. The canoe was named Hokulea, meaning Star of Gladness. Craftsmen used both traditional techniques and modern safety adjustments to build the vessel. Community members gathered to watch the construction, treating it not simply as a boat-building project, but as a cultural rebirth. When Hokulea launched into the ocean, it carried far more than sailors. It carried pride, memory, and a renewed connection to ancient knowledge. Navigators trained carefully, learning to read the night sky with extraordinary precision. They memorized star paths and ocean rhythms. Their training required deep concentration, patience, and respect for the sea. In 1976, Hokulea completed a historic voyage to Tahiti using traditional navigation methods. The successful journey confirmed what native Hawaiians had always known: their ancestors were among the world's greatest ocean navigators. The voyage sparked emotional celebrations across Hawaii. People gathered on beaches to welcome the returning canoe. Many described feeling a powerful sense of cultural awakening as if voices from the past were speaking again through the waves. This moment strengthened the broader Hawaiian Renaissance. Artists began painting landscapes inspired by ancestral stories. Writers recorded oral histories. Cultural festivals expanded, focusing on education rather than performance alone. Universities and research centers also became more involved, supporting studies in Hawaiian history, environmental knowledge, and traditional agricultural methods such as loikalo, the ancient system of taro farming using carefully managed water terraces. Communities restored historic fish ponds that had once supplied coastal villages with sustainable seafood. Volunteers cleared invasive plants and replanted native forests. Cultural revival and environmental stewardship often moved together, guided by the belief that cultural survival depended on the health of the land and ocean. Throughout this period, everyday life in Hawaii continued balancing tradition and modernity. Children attended regular schools while also participating in cultural classes after school. Families worked in tourism or military industries while spending weekends at cultural festivals or community restoration projects. The islands were not returning to the past. Instead, they were learning how to carry the past forward into modern life. Visitors arriving during this era sometimes noticed subtle changes. Cultural demonstrations became more educational and respectful. Museums expanded exhibits explaining Hawaiian history from native perspectives. Local storytelling tours shared deeper historical understanding rather than simple entertainment. The Hawaiian Renaissance was not loud or rushed. It unfolded slowly, like waves reshaping a shoreline over time. It reminded residents that identity could survive even after political and economic transformations. It showed that traditions were not fragile relics. They were living systems capable of adapting and growing. By the late 20th century, Hawaii had become known not only for beaches and tourism, but also for cultural strength and community resilience. And as trade winds continued, carrying the scent of salt and plumeria flowers across the islands, the voices of ancestors seemed to move gently within those breezes, guiding a new generation toward remembering who they were and where they came from. The success of Hokulea did not mark the end of the cultural revival. It ignited it. After the 1976 voyage to Tahiti, interest in traditional navigation surged. More young Hawaiians wanted to learn how their ancestors had read the ocean like a living map. Master navigator Maupie Lug from Micronesia played a crucial role, teaching wayfinding techniques that had nearly vanished in Hawaii. Navigation was no longer just history. It became a living classroom beneath the stars. Voyages expanded across the Pacific to Aotearoa, New Zealand, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, and eventually around the world. Each journey strengthened cultural ties between Polynesian communities separated by thousands of miles of ocean, but connected by shared ancestry. The ocean, once seen by outsiders as a barrier, was reclaimed as a highway of heritage. At the same time, the Hawaiian language movement gained powerful momentum. In the 1980s, the first Hawaiian language immersion preschools, known as Punana Leo, were established. These schools surrounded children entirely in Olelo, Hawaii from an early age. What began with only a few families quickly grew into a statewide movement. Fluency began increasing again. Universities introduced Hawaiian language degree programs. Radio stations aired news in Hawaiian. Street signs included correct diacritical marks, restoring proper spelling and pronunciation of place names. Language was becoming visible once more. Political awareness also deepened during this era. In 1993, on the 100th anniversary of the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, the United States Congress passed a formal apology resolution acknowledging the role of American agents in the overthrow. While symbolic, the apology sparked renewed conversations about sovereignty, land rights, and historical justice. For many native Hawaiians, the apology was a starting point, not a conclusion. Community groups organized peaceful demonstrations and educational forums. Some advocated for federal recognition similar to Native American tribes. Others supported broader sovereignty or self-governance initiatives. These discussions were complex and emotional. They were not simply about politics, they were about identity, memory, and healing. Meanwhile, environmental stewardship became central to the Renaissance spirit. Ancient fish ponds, once abandoned, were restored by volunteers. Taro fields were replanted using traditional irrigation systems. Native forests were protected from invasive species. Cultural practitioners emphasized that caring for the land was inseparable from cultural survival. The phrase Malamaina became more than a slogan. It became a guiding principle. Sacred sites also became focal points for activism. On Kahulawai, an island once used for military bombing practice, activists campaigned for restoration. Eventually, bombing stopped, and efforts began to heal the damaged land. On Mauna Kea, debates over telescope construction highlighted tensions between scientific advancement and sacred tradition. For many Hawaiians, the mountain is a spiritual ancestor, not merely real estate. These moments revealed an important truth. The Renaissance was not only about preserving songs and language, it was about protecting dignity, land, and future generations. At the same time, Hawaii's multicultural identity continued evolving. Communities blended traditions naturally. A local family might celebrate Japanese Obon in summer, attend a Hawaiian Makahiki festival in winter, and gather for Filipino fiestas in between. Food reflected this harmony. Laulau beside teriyaki, poi alongside rice, Pidgin English, shaped by plantation-era communication between diverse groups, became a shared everyday language across communities. Hawaii was not returning to a single identity. It was embracing all its layers. By the early 2000s, the Hawaiian Renaissance had matured into something lasting. Cultural festivals attracted both locals and visitors eager to learn respectfully. Educational programs integrated native Hawaiian perspectives into mainstream curriculum. Young artists blended hip-hop with traditional chant, proving culture could evolve without disappearing. The movement had shifted from revival to renewal. A generation that grew up during the Renaissance began raising children of their own, children who saw Hawaiian language, navigation, and ceremony not as rare treasures, but as normal parts of life. And yet, challenges remained. Economic inequality, housing costs, tourism pressures, and environmental threats continued shaping modern Hawaii. Climate change added new urgency to coastal protection and sustainability efforts, but the Renaissance had provided something powerful: confidence. Confidence that culture could survive colonization. Confidence that language could return from near silence. Confidence that ancestral wisdom still mattered in a modern world. As Hokulea continued sailing across oceans, and as children recited morning chants in immersion schools, Hawaii stood as an example of cultural resilience, not frozen in the past, not defined solely by tourism, but guided by stars, both ancient and newly rediscovered, shining over islands that had learned how to remember themselves again. Number 8. Modern Hawaii and global identity. As the cultural renaissance strengthened Hawaii from within, the islands were also stepping more confidently onto the global stage. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Hawaii had become far more than a vacation destination. It was a strategic military hub, a center for Pacific diplomacy, a leader in environmental innovation, and a cultural bridge between East and West. Honolulu's skyline continued rising. Glass towers reflected the ocean. International flights arrived daily from Asia, North America, and Oceania. Waikiki buzzed with visitors speaking Japanese, Korean, English, and countless other languages. Tourism had become the backbone of the economy. Millions arrived each year seeking beaches, volcanoes, and warm trade winds. Resorts expanded. Cruise ships docked at busy harbors. Small businesses thrived on surf lessons, guided hikes, and cultural tours. Yet growth brought delicate questions. How many visitors were too many? How could sacred sites remain protected? How could local families afford rising housing costs driven by outside investment? These questions shaped public conversation more deeply than ever before. Meanwhile, Hawaii's role in global defense remained significant. Pearl Harbor continued operating as a major naval base. Military partnerships extended across the Pacific region. Hawaii's location placed it at the center of geopolitical strategy between the United States and Asia. But alongside military presence stood scientific advancement. Mauna Kea's summit hosted some of the world's most powerful telescopes, peering deep into space. Marine biology research flourished along coral reefs. Volcanologists studied Kilauea and Mauna Loa, two of the most active volcanoes on Earth. The islands became a living laboratory. Researchers examined climate change, rising sea levels, coral bleaching, and renewable energy solutions. Because Hawaii relies heavily on imported fuel, it began investing aggressively in solar, wind, and geothermal power. Sustainability was not just environmental policy, it was survival planning. As an isolated island chain, Hawaii understood vulnerability. Hurricanes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions were natural realities. Emergency preparedness and community resilience became essential parts of modern life. Culturally, Hawaii continued blending influences gracefully. Local identity embraced diversity. A single classroom might include students with Hawaiian, Japanese, Filipino, Samoan, Portuguese, and mainland American heritage. Cultural exchange was not theoretical, it was daily life. Food told this story clearly. Poke bowls sat beside spam musubi. Plate lunches combined rice, macaroni salad, and teriyaki chicken. Farmers' markets sold taro, mangoes, and dragon fruit. Cuisine became a symbol of shared identity. Music evolved as well. Traditional chants mixed with reggae, hip-hop, and contemporary island pop. Artists sang in both English and Hawaiian, sometimes blending the two within a single verse. The Hawaiian language, once near extinction, now appeared on official documents, university programs, and street signs. A new generation grew up bilingual, comfortable navigating both ancient vocabulary and modern technology. Yet the balance remained delicate. Short-term vacation rentals reduced housing availability. Rising property values pushed some local families to the mainland. Traffic congestion increased on Oahu. Debates over development versus preservation continued shaping policy decisions. Community activism stayed active and vocal. From protecting water resources to opposing overdevelopment, residents remained deeply engaged in shaping their island's future. Then came moments that reminded the world of Hawaii's fragility. Major volcanic eruptions reshaped parts of the Big Island, covering neighborhoods in lava and creating new coastline. Hurricanes threatened infrastructure. Wildfires in dry regions demonstrated the growing impact of climate change. Through each challenge, community networks responded quickly. Neighbors checked on elders. Local organizations provided aid. Cultural values of kuleana, responsibility, guided collective action. Modern Hawaii stands at an intersection. It is a U.S. state with global military significance. It is a Pacific Island society rooted in ancient navigation. It is a tourist paradise and a homeland. It is technologically advanced yet spiritually grounded. The ocean that once carried the first Polynesian voyagers now carries cargo ships, naval fleets, research vessels, and passenger planes overhead. Yet at sunrise, the same golden light spreads across volcanic ridges. At night, the same stars that guided ancient navigators shimmer above. Modern Hawaii is not defined by a single story. It is a conversation between past and future, between preservation and progress, between global influence and local identity. And as waves continue meeting lava rock along the shore, the islands move forward, not forgetting where they came from, but carefully choosing where they are going next. As Hawaii moved deeper into the 21st century, the conversation about balance became more urgent than ever. Tourism, once seen only as opportunity, began to reveal its limits. Record-breaking visitor numbers placed pressure on beaches, hiking trails, and coral reefs. Popular spots like Hanauma Bay and the Anapali coast faced environmental strain. For many residents, the question shifted from growth to sustainability. Local leaders introduced visitor education programs, encouraging respect for wildlife, sacred sites, and community spaces. Campaigns reminded travelers that Hawaii is not just a destination, it is someone's home. The phrase "travel with aloha" began gaining importance. Meanwhile, climate change intensified natural risks. Rising sea levels threatened coastal roads and neighborhoods. Coral bleaching events damaged reef ecosystems that protect shorelines and support marine life. Stronger storms and shifting rainfall patterns affected agriculture and water supply. Scientists and cultural practitioners often worked side by side. Ancient Hawaiian knowledge of land management, such as ahupua'a systems that divided land from mountain to sea, inspired modern sustainability models. These systems emphasized balance, ensuring that upland forests, freshwater streams, and coastal fisheries were all cared for as interconnected parts of one living system. Technology also reshaped daily life. Remote work allowed some residents to live in Hawaii while working for mainland companies. At the same time, this trend increased housing demand, further raising property prices. Lawmakers debated how to protect local communities from displacement. Economic diversification became a priority. Beyond tourism and the military, Hawaii invested in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, ocean research, and film production. The island's landscapes attracted major film studios, bringing global media attention and additional revenue streams. Culturally, pride continued strengthening. Hawaiian language immersion graduates entered universities and government roles. Cultural protocol, such as opening public events with traditional chant, became more common and widely respected. Young leaders emerged who were deeply connected to both modern education and ancestral wisdom. Social movements remained active. Demonstrations on Mauna Kea over telescope construction brought international visibility to native Hawaiian perspectives. The gatherings were not only protests, they were cultural affirmations, with chants, hula, and ceremony reinforcing spiritual connection to the land. These events showed that Hawaii's identity is not passive, it is thoughtful, it is engaged, it is protective of what matters most. Then, global disruptions again tested the islands. The COVID-19 pandemic brought tourism to a near standstill. Empty beaches and quiet hotels revealed how dependent the economy had become on visitors. Yet the pause also allowed ecosystems brief recovery and sparked renewed discussion about redefining economic priorities. Many residents began asking, what does a truly sustainable Hawaii look like? How can culture guide policy? How can growth honor both ancestors and future generations? The answers are still unfolding. Today, Hawaii stands as a place of paradox and possibility. It is home to cutting-edge astronomy and ancient star navigation. It welcomes millions of visitors yet fiercely protects sacred valleys. It faces climate vulnerability yet leads renewable innovation. Above all, Hawaii continues weaving its story carefully, not rushing forward without reflection, not clinging to the past without adaptation. The trade winds still move steadily across the islands. Waves still rise and fall in rhythmic patience. Children still learn chants that echo voices from centuries ago. Modern Hawaii is not simply surviving history. It is actively shaping its next chapter, guided by memory, responsibility, and the enduring spirit of aloha. And as the Pacific horizon stretches endlessly outward, the islands remain both grounded and open, rooted deeply in their land, yet connected to the entire world beyond it. Number 9. The spirit of aloha. Beyond politics, beyond tourism, beyond headlines and history, there is something quieter that defines Hawaii. It is not a building, it is not a law, it is not even a single culture, it is a way of being. The word aloha is often translated simply as hello or goodbye. Visitors hear it at airports, in hotels, on postcards and souvenirs. But within Hawaiian tradition, aloha carries a far deeper meaning. It reflects love, compassion, patience, humility, and shared breath. In ancient understanding, alo means presence or face-to-face connection, and ha refers to the breath of life. To share aloha is to share breath, to recognize the life within another person. This idea shaped early Hawaiian society. Communities survived through cooperation. Fishing, farming, and canoe building required collective effort. Chiefs were expected to care for the well-being of the people. Families worked together within the Ahupua system, understanding that balance between mountain and ocean ensured survival. Aloha was not weakness, it was strength through harmony. Even during times of conflict between islands, cultural protocol guided behavior. Respect, or hoihi, was deeply valued. Generosity, or lokomaikai, strengthened relationships. Responsibility, known as kuleana, reminded each person of their role within the community. As Hawaii experienced overthrow, annexation, and rapid modernization, aloha did not disappear. It adapted. Plantation-era workers from Japan, the Philippines, Portugal, China, and elsewhere brought their own traditions of respect and family loyalty. Over time, these values blended naturally with Hawaiian principles. A unique local culture formed. Neighbors looked after one another. Food was shared generously at gatherings. First names were common even across generations, reinforcing closeness rather than hierarchy. In daily life, aloha often appears in simple gestures, holding the door for someone without being asked, letting another car merge in traffic with a small hand wave, bringing extra food to a family gathering just in case. It is visible in the way elders are treated with warmth and patience. It is heard in the relaxed tone of conversation shaped by island rhythm. But aloha is not always soft. It also includes standing firm when land, culture, or family is threatened, protecting sacred spaces, speaking respectfully but clearly, acting with integrity even when difficult. True aloha balances kindness with courage. Modern Hawaii even recognizes this legally. The Aloha Spirit Law, written into state law, encourages public officials to treat others with care and respect, guided by values such as patience, unity, and mutual regard. While symbolic, it reflects how deeply these principles are woven into identity. Tourism often markets aloha as hospitality, yet for residents, it is more intimate than that. It shapes how communities respond during crisis, whether facing hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, or economic hardship. When wildfires or floods strike, neighbors gather supplies quickly, churches open shelters, volunteers cook meals for strangers. Aloha becomes action. It reminds people that no one stands alone on an island. Culturally, aloha connects past to present. Traditional chants often begin by honoring ancestors and the land. Public events may open with a blessing. Even competitive sports teams speak about playing with aloha, meaning respect for opponents and gratitude for the opportunity. Children grow up hearing the word daily, but they learn its meaning by watching how adults treat others. In a world that often moves quickly and competitively, Hawaii offers a quieter reminder. Strength can be gentle, leadership can be humble, community can come before individual gain. The spirit of aloha does not erase conflict or hardship. Hawaii faces real challenges: economic inequality, environmental strain, cultural debates. But aloha provides a foundation for navigating those challenges without losing humanity. It encourages listening before reacting, helping before judging, sharing before hoarding. Visitors sometimes describe feeling something different in the islands: a slower pace, a softer energy. While geography and climate play a role, much of that feeling comes from this shared cultural heartbeat. Aloha lives in language. It lives in food shared across tables. It lives in chants rising at sunrise. It lives in quiet acts of kindness no one records. And as waves continue folding onto shorelines shaped by ancient lava, the spirit of aloha moves just as steadily, unseen but deeply felt. It is the thread connecting voyagers guided by stars, plantation workers building new futures, activists protecting sacred land, and children laughing beneath palm trees today. Aloha is not just a word, it is Hawaii's living pulse. Number 10. Hawaii. A story still unfolding from the first Polynesian voyagers who crossed thousands of miles guided only by stars, to a unified kingdom under Kamehameha, to overthrow, annexation, world war, statehood, and cultural renaissance. Hawaii's journey has never been simple. It is a story of brilliance and bravery, of loss and resilience, of identity challenged and identity reclaimed. Today, Hawaii stands as the 50th state of the United States, yet its roots stretch far deeper than 1959. Skyscrapers rise in Honolulu, but sacred chants still echo through valleys at dawn. Military ships anchor in Pearl Harbor, while double-hulled voyaging canoes sail using ancient navigation techniques. Tourists relax on Waikiki Beach, unaware that beneath the sand lies a layered history shaped by royalty, revolution, and revival. The islands hold contradictions beautifully. They are modern, yet ancient, global, yet deeply local, American, yet unmistakably Polynesian. Native Hawaiian language, once nearly silenced, now thrives in immersion schools. Cultural ceremonies open public events. Environmental movements draw inspiration from ancestral land systems like the Ahupua. But challenges remain. Rising sea levels threaten coastlines. Housing affordability pushes families to difficult decisions. Tourism must balance economy with sustainability. Sacred lands continue to spark debate over development and preservation. Hawaii's future is not guaranteed. It must be shaped carefully and consciously. What makes Hawaii remarkable is not just its landscapes of volcanic peaks and turquoise water, it is the endurance of its people, the ability to adapt without forgetting, the strength to modernize while honoring ancestors. The same ocean that once tested early navigators now connects Hawaii to the entire world. Airplanes cross skies that ancient wayfinders once read through constellations. And still, the trade winds blow steadily. History here is not locked in textbooks. It lives in language, in music, in food shared across generations, in the quiet respect offered to land and sea. Hawaii is not a finished chapter. It is a living story, shaped by those who protect its culture, those who innovate its future, and those who understand that paradise is not just scenery, but responsibility. As the sun sets beyond the Pacific horizon and golden light reflects across the waves, Hawaii stands between memory and possibility, carrying its past, protecting its present, and steadily navigating toward whatever future lies beyond the next rising tide.